Okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. All right. So I'm recording. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to session 5 of the HALT Summer Summit Teacher Tuesdays. And in today's section, we are welcoming Kevin and Elizabeth, who are going to be sharing their expertise regarding bringing culture to life in the CCLT classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin and Elizabeth. Welcome.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you so much, Gina. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session, and Gina for graciously introducing us and uh, giving you sort of a preview that we're going to be sharing some of the things that we do to bring culture into our classrooms. My name is Kevin Sledge, as you can see there, and if you notice on the screen, I have my email, and you'll see that again at the end of this session, so don't worry if you miss it this time. Please feel free, I know speaking for myself, to reach out anytime you have questions or if you have ideas that you want to share with me, because I'm always looking for ways to elevate my practice in my classroom. And so that's me. I'll pass it over to Elizabeth.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Jiménez Salinas, and I also have my email address there and want to invite you, any of you, no matter what language you teach, to consider inviting me to come to talk to your students about the part of the project that I'll be discussing today, which is the Multicultural Author Project, having kids learn how to write children's books in their target language and possibly in English or their home language as well. So anyway, good morning, everyone.
Okay. So here's a look at what we hope to do today during this session. And we're in the portion of today's session where we open and we give ourselves introductions. And then next, we will discuss some foundational concepts that moving forward in this session and on into your practice, it would be good to understand and have a working definition of these things like culture, products, practices, perspectives, etc. Then we'll go into some specific strategies and ways to integrate culture into your CCLT classroom, ways that we have already integrated culture into our classrooms. And then we'll have some time for question and answering if you have any questions for us. And then we'll close the session. First, I invite you to type in the chat how you are feeling today. You can use any of these words, or if there's a different emotion you're feeling today, please feel free to type that in the chat. I will go ahead and do that too. Please feel free to also use emojis if you can express yourself better in that way. Lots of happy, excited, relaxed. I love that one. I wish that one on all my teacher friends for the summer. Relaxed. Frazzled. Yeah, sometimes even during the summer we get frazzled. But I am so happy that you're here with us today, Janice. And I hope you leave this session maybe feeling a little bit less frazzled. Okay. Toshi, relaxed, content, happy it's still summer. Oh, let's all celebrate that one. All right. If you haven't had a chance to type how you're feeling today in the chat, please feel free to continue to do that. I'm going to go on with our presentation here. Okay. Again, we want to, before moving on, establish some working definitions, some understandings of certain concepts when we talk about culture. And so we have named this section, what do we mean when we say culture? Okay, we can define culture as ACTFL in their World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages and as the Hawaii World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages has. You'll notice that these are very similar. The Hawaii World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, high RISL, as you might hear me refer to it as, was largely based on the ACTFL World Readiness Standards. And so ACTFL defines cultures, or the way that we should assess culture, cultural learning, cultural understanding in our classrooms um, uh, in relation to practices and perspectives. So as you can read there, that according to ACTFL, what the students should be able to do as we assess their cultural understanding is use the language to investigate, explain, reflect on the relationship between the practice and perspectives of the cultures studied. And then use the language to investigate, explain, and reflect on the relationship between the products and perspectives of the culture study. Yeah. And so when we are talking about culture in our classroom and introducing culture and getting students to understand and experience culture in our classrooms, we really should be looking for them to do these things: investigate, explain, reflect on relationships between, again, the practices and perspectives of the culture studied. And if you're not sure what practices and perspectives means, don't worry, we will talk about that in just a bit. But again, you'll notice that the Hawaii World Readiness Standards are very similar. According to the high RISL, we should be assessing that students are able to interact with cultural competence and understanding. And what that means, you can see on the right side of this graphic that we have here, entitled or sectioned off as relating cultural practices to perspectives. There are those two words again, practices and perspectives. And you can read that for yourself. I won't read that word for word. If you are not able to read it right now during this presentation, we move on too quickly. You can absolutely pretty much just Google ACTFL World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages and Hawaii World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, and they should pop up in at the top of your Google searches. And as a matter of fact, that's where I got these graphics from, if you can see it on the bottom there. Okay. And so as you are assessing culture and cultural understanding in your classrooms, the high RISL, the document that you can find online, kind of gives us certain points that we can refer to when assessing our students, right? These are the proficiency levels, performance indicators, right? These are what students should be able to do. This is what we're looking for them to be able to do at certain levels of learning. Yeah. And so you can see there that each of these performance, the proficiency levels, novice range, the intermediate range, advanced range, and so on, have different indicators, different things that students should be able to do at the level indicated. And again, I want to direct attention to the two words, practices and perspectives, relating practices to perspectives, etc. So we see these words over and over again, so we know that they are important to the assessing of cultural understanding in our classrooms. Again, if I move on too quickly, you can find this online through a Google search. Again, just Hawaii World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, IRSL. Okay. All right, so again, we saw those two words. Here we add another one, perspectives, right? These are the things that we are looking for, or these are the things that we are working to understand, the relationship between when we are talking about culture and cultural understanding in our classrooms, right? We have, I'll start from the top because that's where it is, perspectives. And um, these are the things in culture that are a little bit more difficult to see. Um, these are the things that we would have to maybe infer based on the other things that we can actually see about culture, which are like the practices and products. You can see here, I'll start with the products. These are things that are very easy to identify when we talk about culture. These are books, tools, foods, yeah, music, games, etc. Also, practices are easy to see and identify when we talk about culture. These are social interactions. What do people do in the culture? And so, again, those things, practices and products, are easy to identify. And through understanding of those things, through reflection on how those things relate to each other, we can gain a better understanding, or our students can gain a better understanding of um, the meanings and the attitudes and the values and ideas that people of a certain culture have. Okay. And I really like this graphic here. It just kind of shows another way of looking at, I guess, the relationship between products and practices and perspectives, right? We notice at the top, again, very easy to see if we think about the image of an iceberg, whatever's on top above the surface, we can see that very easily. And in as we talk about culture, what that would relate to is, again, the food, the language, the flags, the dancing, the arts that people in a culture produce. What we don't always readily see without a bit of reflection um, are the perspectives, and we can see down on the bottom of the iceberg there. Maybe the writing is a little bit small for you, but what that represents is all of the perspectives, right? Um, how do people in the culture, what does it mean when you give eye contact or don't give eye contact, right? In Spanish, maybe it is using tú versus usted, right? Why do we use that in certain situations, etc. Okay, here I'm sharing with you sort of some slides that I presented to some of my students um, to give them an understanding of what culture is, just like I'm doing here with you now. Um, I believe these slides are all in Spanish, so I'll do my best to translate as much of it as I can. But you see here, cultura, culture. This is what I'm teaching my students, what this is. This is a mini lesson. Okay. And here, what it says in English is culture is defined as the products, practices, and perspectives of a society or group of people. All right. I give students a very concrete practice. Here, the dancing in the Dominican Republic. This dance in particular is called bachata. And so this is something, again, that students can see easily, and they could recognize it and identify it as a part of specifically Dominican and, on a larger level, Hispanic culture. I give them another concrete example of culture, right? A product here. Maybe we can categorize that as a practice of doing sugar skulls, calaveras de azúcar, literally skulls of sugar, mainly in Mexico. And so students can see that and identify it as, again, part of Mexican culture and on a larger scale, Hispanic, within Hispanic culture. Okay. And then I tell them here that a part of culture could be, for example, the story of Pachamama. It's a deity akin to Mother Earth in Peru. And so they would have had that background knowledge, right? This mini lesson would have come after we had talked about Pachamama in class. And so then they would be able to recognize that as a part of the culture of Peru, specifically the Quechua culture or the Inca culture in Peru. And again, on a larger scale, as part of the culture of the Spanish-speaking world. Okay. And so here I go into a sort of more specific explanation or presentation of what those three main components of culture are. Here I present to them products and what that means, right? And on the bottom you can see it's things made by humans. And I want to just kind of give a caveat here that the explanation of the things that I have here are, you may think that they're a bit simple or very generalized. And, I apologize for that in advance. What I wanted here was to go for comprehensibility, right? Words that students can understand, right? I'm trying to keep this as much in the target language as possible. And so I wanted to keep the language accessible to them. And so a lot of the explanations might seem simplified here on the screen. But again, products, we defined that or identified that as the things that humans make. Practices, and you can see here I give pictures to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here, again, to make the language more accessible to students. And I apologize, my toolbar here is, give me just a second. Okay, I apologize, I couldn't see that. So we identified practices as actions, things that people in the culture do. So those are practices. And then I'm going to see if this will work if I open it up again. Okay. Perspectives, we identified or defined as ideas, attitudes, and points of view. Right? Again, the language is simplified in a way that it's most accessible to the students. Yeah. Okay, and then I end by asking them this question: what evidence of culture can be found or is found in this photo? And so students, they name out the dresses or the hats or the animals, right? So these are things that they can see that might help them to identify this photo as a picture of Quechua people of Peru, in the mountains of Peru. And then I finish by asking them to fill in the blank with the language that they might have. At this top sentence with the blank, it says, for humans, culture is blah, blah, blah. Right? They fill in. I specify here 4 words, but you could, if you did an activity like this, leave it open to them. And then I get more specific in this second sentence with the blank here down at the bottom. It says, in the culture of the Quechuas, blah, blah, blah. And they finish the sentence there. reflecting back on the picture that they saw and reflecting back on what they know about culture and products, practices, and perspectives. We have them fill in the blank there. Okay. Now I move on to the portion of this presentation that we call Ways to Integrate Culture in Your Comprehension-Based Communicative Language Teaching, CCLT classroom. Okay, and I'm going to start by giving some ways that I have done or tried to do that in my classroom. And the first way, these are in no particular order. These are just the way that I organize the slides here for today. But cultural holidays and festivities as an entry point to comprehensible input. I think it's really easy for me, I'll say, during holidays or festive occasions to, number one, have students interested in talking about these things, right? It's compelling topics, right? They want to talk about it. And so I talk about it with them in the target language. In our Spanish classes, in particular, things like Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead, Christmas traditions. We have Hispanic Heritage Month, particularly at the beginning of the school year, and several other festive occasions that lend themselves to giving students comprehensible input and giving them input specifically about these cultural occasions. Yeah. And so again, Dia de Muertos is one that students look forward to pretty much every year. They're asking us about that before we even, mention it to them. And they're familiar with it because of Coco and Book of Life and all these things. And so they come into our Spanish classrooms excited about Dia de Muertos in particular. So I like to use a lot of comprehensible input strategies in order to help me stay in the target language with students and to deliver whatever content it is in that target language. And so one of the things that I use during the time of Dia de Muertos is a clip chat. Some of you might call this a movie talk, right? Clip chat here is a short film, as you can see at the top of the screen, by Team Hu Kazoo and Ringling and the CG Bros. And you can find this clip on YouTube. I put the complete title there, CGI 3D animated short film, in case you want to note that and go to YouTube directly to this video. But if you go to YouTube and you just click and you just type Dia de los Muertos short video, this one will come up. And this is a short video with no words, in which a little girl visits sort of the world of the deceased, right? I'm not going to tell too much about this because maybe you want to watch this. There's sort of a happy twist at the end, and I'll save that for you. But clip chat again.
4-minute warning, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. Clip chat is a good way to give input, and specifically cultural input, to students that compels them to engage in the conversation, engage in listening, and maybe responding back to you in the target language. Okay, and so then with the students during Dia de Muertos, during that holiday season, we make sugar skulls with them. And this, the way that I give them input on this is I give them the instructions how to make the sugar skulls in Spanish, and we do it step by step together. And it's really easy to assess comprehension because you can see if they're doing their skull right. It's a very concrete way. And we can talk about how these skulls and the colors and the bright and the festive decorations, they sort of reflect a death is a part of life, and we celebrate the life of our deceased loved ones. We can see that through the way that these skulls are decorated. They're in comparison to Halloween skulls, right, which are made to look very scary. These are made to look fun. Yeah. And we talk about that with the students in the target language. Calendar talk. You can easily use calendar talk to talk about different holidays in the students' cultures, in American culture, in, you know, the cultures of the Spanish-speaking world. You can see here I have an example of a calendar that I have made with students in my class. It has students' birthdays. We can put school and community events like football games and homecoming. We can talk about those things, etc. Here, I have sort of a page from my slideshow that I use during calendar talk. Not only do we talk about the date in the Gregorian calendar, but we also, in my classes, talk about the Hawaiian moon phases and what that means for the day. On the left side, you can see at the top in yellow, it says, it's a good day for, and then the list of all those things. And then on the right side, it says, it's not a good day for, and then a list of all those things. A lot of the words are cognates to students. And so I don't really have to go into what each word means, which is what I like about this. And so I can keep this all in the target language, even though we're talking about, number one, the calendar, and number two, here we're engaging in a little bit of Hawaiian culture. Moving forward, what I would really like to work out is how to integrate the Mayan calendar in here. And I have a website that converts the day's date to what it would be in the Mayan calendar, right? I like to try to integrate indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and being into my classroom. And so I'm hoping to be able to work this out to add that layer as well. A through line that I have already identified is that the Mayan people used their calendar, among other things, to gauge what to plant and when, right? So it's an agricultural calendar. And in the Hawaiian moon phase calendar, it talks a lot about what days are good for planting certain things and not. And so I'm hoping to make those connections. Picture talk. We can find pictures from your cultures and talk about those, and talk about what the images mean, what it says about the cultures from whence they came. These are just examples of pictures that I might use in my class to talk about. This one, for example, the Moorish rule over Spain for a certain amount of time, and we can see that in a lot of art that still exists in Spain, right? And we can talk about geometry and why the Islamic art, the Moorish art, always features heavily geometric figures. What does that mean? Frida Kahlo, a lot of my students, they come into the classroom knowing about Frida. I'm not quite sure how, but she's a popular figure that they come into the class knowing. And so we can talk about this picture in particular, where on the left side, she's very recognizably in European clothing. And then on the right side, she's in her indigenous clothing. We can talk about what that means with the students. And again, of course, in comprehensible language, right, we do have to take into account the level of the students, what they're able to understand, and how they're able to respond to any input you give them, etc. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Kevin,
You're welcome.
for laying that foundation about culture and what it means. And we're going to launch into this next segment. If any of you have questions for Kevin, we will definitely make time for you at the end, or you can put them in the chat, and then Gina can, take hold of those. Please, if you're interested in having me come and speak to your students, here's my email address and my ancient phone number. so that you can text me if you'd like. Okay, so go ahead, Kevin, and take me to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about a way to implement and augment what students know about culture and what they need to know about the culture of the language that they're learning. So if you think about ways to connect the language, we're thinking about the things that they're maybe unfamiliar with. So for the Spanish language culture, for example, my students would have to learn some of the things that are particular to that language or to that culture. For example, the quinceañera. Some of you have heard of a quinceañera. 15th birthday of a girl is celebrated in a very opulent way. It's sort of like a wedding with no groom. Okay, so everybody's dressed and, you know, very fancy and so forth. But if that student is a Filipino student, they may be familiar with the debut, which is when they turn 18, the girls can also celebrate something very similar, very, you know, big production. So we can think about the connection of culture to the new language, to their home culture, and also to the Aina. So for example, we'll look at the pañuelo. If you're teaching Spanish, wow, that is a fantastic connection, because the pañuelo, who are mainly found in the Hawaiian, the Big Island, those individuals came originally from Mexico, and they came not as slaves or in that enslaved way. They came to teach the owners of these ranches how to be successful. Okay, so these three pieces, I want to talk about the multicultural author project that I started, gosh, maybe 12 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, I'm not sure. In any case, we start always with an author visit. That can be online, but it can also be in person. And the first thing we have students do is prepare questions for the author, of course, in the target language. Let's see, the author then reads aloud the story and shares, then I share with students the need for children's books in other languages. So this is a very, very important piece, because we know there's lots of research that tells that when children are read to, when they have story that's told to them, they build language. And so what a wonderful thing for students to have books in the new language, books in the home language, and to share those. The second step in this process is what I call concept books. So students, once they realize that their skill is needed to write these children's books, we have them start with a whole bunch of concept books, like alphabet books, counting books, opposites, colors. These are things that you would typically find in a beginning language course. You know, let's learn all about opposites or colors or holidays or whatever, but it's done in a way that it's presented to children in the target language. The wonderful thing about children's books is that they use and rely on the art and the illustrations. So this makes a wonderful opportunity for us to connect meaning from the words to the pictures, or the pictures to the words, okay? And then the third step in this project is to write about what you love, write about what you care about, write about what you know, right? So, and you'll see examples of that that students did, where they select a topic. Then the next thing I have them do is craft a repetitive refrain. Think about this for a moment. When you look at children's books, alphabet books, for example, in English, it may say something like A is for apple, what does that mean, is for? Okay, so I have them craft a repetitive refrain that uses the language structure that they're learning. Okay, and so, for example, the students that I worked with in California who were in a newcomer class and who spoke only Spanish, they wrote a book based on what they loved, which was football, which was soccer. And they wrote that book with a repetitive refrain that says, in the alphabet of soccer, A represents athlete. Okay, so they had that refrain and then it repeated every single time. So it gives your kids lots of practice with the language, with with the structure. Another thing that the students get to do is to develop art specifications. So I'm a children's book author from way back. Wrote children's books in Spanish, have had them published through Scholastic and other companies and my own. And when you are a person like me who doesn't know how to do the illustrations, you need to send in with your manuscript some art specifications. This is an opportunity for your students to practice, to look up in a dictionary, to find places that give them adjectives, description. So I'm going to show you in just a moment a book that I wrote that is called Lalo. And in the story of Lalo, he is blonde, light skin, and yet his family is Mexican American. And so in that story, I have to tell the artist, to tell the illustrator, you're going to draw a 6-year-old child who's tall and lanky and has light skin and blonde hair and so forth. Now, I also could use, and this is what we did over at Waipahu High School with the students who were in the English Learner Program, okay? So we use the tech tools like Canva, and I've used Microsoft Publisher. These are terrific because they can use clip art, they can do the illustration themselves. Another thing that we've done in the past is to pair students with others who are graphic arts students, and so that they have an opportunity to co-author and illustrate something. And then finally, one of the modules in our project that I've co-opted is for the students in your class to read aloud their story and record it for others to listen to. Now, this is very important because reading aloud and recording a story is not simply blah, 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 blah. It has to have intonation. It has to have pauses. It needs to be correctly pronounced. And so the kids get practice reading something over and over, which is good because sometimes they'll say, oh, I already read that. I already did that. So anyway, these are 3 steps in the project. Kevin, go ahead and put me on the next slide. And so we started this, let's see, in 2018. Some of you know our HALT companion, Mayra Hietling, who was a Spanish teacher at Waipahu High School. She invited me to her class after she had met me at a HALT conference, and I gave to the students some books to read, and here they are showing off their some of the books that we had. Go ahead and go to the next one. And then this is another teacher from Waipahu High School who invited me to his class to share my story and to share this whole notion of writing for young children to the students in his Spanish class. So thank you, Kevin. Okay, go ahead. Now, this is the story, Lalo, that was published a long time ago. And I'll tell you quickly the story. Normally, I would come and read this either in English, or if it's in a Spanish class, I would read it in Spanish. And sometimes we'll do both if we need to. But having the students predict, what do you think is going to happen here? and looking at the exclamation points made of jalapenos. Okay. And the story of Lalo, I will just tell you because I don't have the whole thing plugged in here. I didn't want to take so much time. But in the story of Lalo, he introduces himself to us and he says, I am Lalo and I'm 6 years old. I'm tall and blonde and have brown eyes. My full name is Eduardo Leon Jimenez, but everyone calls me Lalo. I live in a house with my mom, my brother Salvador, my sisters Maria, Gabriela, Alejandra, and also living with us is Vicky, the lady that takes care of us when my mom is working. So he's introducing everybody. Now he says, everybody in our family has nicknames. Salvador is Chava, Maria is Mari, and the twins are Handa and Gabi. Now, Handa got her nickname because her name is Alejandra, and her sister Maria could not pronounce that. She just called her Handa. And so to this day, at 34 years old, she's still Handa. And Vicky is La Vicky. Mi mamá es mamá. Now, in my family, everyone is dark-skinned, moreno, except for my sister Gabi, my mom, and me. And then you see a picture in the book of him crying. You've got tears coming from his eyes. He says, before, when my father lived with us, my grandmother, my aunt, and 6 of my cousins lived here too. Sometimes my cousins made me cry because they told me that I wasn't really Mexican because I wasn't dark. They called me El Güerito, which is not a bad word at all. It's just the light-skinned one. And so he cried. His cousins teased him, and one day they told him, if you eat a lot of chile, you become Mexican and you'll have dark hair like we do. And so that afternoon, I took 2 large chiles from the refrigerator and I bit them. And I let out a scream of pain, and my mom came running. She gave me a lot of water to drink. My mom scolded my cousins for their mischief, and she scolded me for having believed them. She told me that it's not the color of your hair or eating chile that makes someone Mexican. She told me that I was born güerito, light-skinned, because I'm her son, and she is güerita, light-skinned. And I was born Mexican because my father is from Mexico. And then at the very end, he says, I'm Lalo, and I'm 6 years old. I'm güerito, light-skinned. I don't like chile, and yes, I am Mexican. Now, believe it or not, the high school kids really like this story because there's teasing and bullying involved, and they can relate to the chile thing. Even the students at Waipahu World, Filipino students, were like, oh yeah, my mom gives us, she doesn't give us water to drink. She gives us milk, or she gives us bread, or something to calm down the hot chile acid. And I go, wow, your mom's like a scientist. She knows that those neutralize the acid. So very exciting. So this was a book I wrote when I worked for a very large textbook publishing company. And the other editors in our group loved the story. And they're like, yeah, we got to include that in our Texas Spanish reading series. Well, the head guy in charge didn't understand Spanish, certainly didn't understand culture, Kevin. And so he said, no, we can't publish that book. Why? Everybody liked it because it talks about skin color. Well, in our culture, that is very much a part of every family. We have all different shades and just everything. No, can't do that. The other thing that he didn't understand is that in the initial manuscript, I had written that when Lalo's grandmother came to live with us, she brought 6 of her children. So those were his aunts and uncles. And the guy is like, aunts and uncles, why are these adults making fun of a little kid? I said, no, they're not adults. They're a little bit older than he is, like a few years. Well, he says, how could that be? So anyway, I chose to leave that company and go work for Scholastic, and they published it, and it, took off from there. So I want to share that with kids so that they understand that there are people blocking the way for the stories that we tell from our families. And this was a true story from our family. Hey, Kevin, if you switch the slide. I go over with the high school students also these infographics. And the infographics come from the University of Wisconsin. They have a children's book center. And every year they collect all the new publications of children's books from all the different publishers in the US. So if you look at this infographic, you can see that the books are categorized by different ethnicities. And we have the largest group of books that are published in 2012, which I asked the students, were you alive in 2012? And still they're telling me yes. So we'll get to a place where no, but in any case, 93% of the children's books had Caucasian protagonists. So the lead character was white. And then if you look down the list, okay, Asian Pacific Islanders, we had 2%, 1% Native American, less than 1%, 1.5% were about Latinos, and 3% African American. You guys, I tell the students, look around the classroom. Do we have 93%? Okay, so we got to work on this. The other thing is, when you get the detailed information, which I share with the students, a detailed breakdown of the data, when you look at Asian, we're talking about books mainly Chinese, Japanese. They're not talking about Filipino. They're not talking about Hawaiian or other Pacific Island, Micronesian. And so it's really very, very limited. Okay, go ahead and switch to the next one. So a couple of years later, in 2015, the numbers have changed. The white category is now 73.3%. Oh, good. So the other categories are all going to grow, right? There's a new category here. 12.5%, which is the next biggest category, is about animals, trucks, inanimate objects. And then the other categories are growing a tiny, teeny, tiny bit, but not very much. Go ahead to the next one. And then 2018, wow, we're down to 50% white, but look at the animals in other category, 27%. So when we look at culture and we're talking about multicultural books, I tell the students, look, I need you to help write these. I can't write about all the different cultures that are represented in Hawaii, but we need you to step up and tell stories and build this collection of readings. So go ahead and switch. Okay, so like I said, we start with the concept books in our classes so that the students can grow the language and also bring to it some things that they know. Now, this example here is an alphabet book about baby names. So that's kind of interesting. And it's all in, it's in Tagalog. Okay, go ahead and change. This is from a school called the International Academy that I helped to establish in San Bernardino, California. We had students coming mainly from Mexico and Central America, did not speak any English. Many of them had not been to school before. And so we established a special high school within a high school campus that was for these students. And one of the things that I wanted to do was help them to learn to read and write. And of course, we were trying to learn English as well, but started with the language they know best. And there were 2 boys in the class who did not know how to read and write in Spanish. So that was a, a challenge for them as well. Go ahead to the next slide. This is the book that they wrote. One of the groups of boys, I should say, got together and they wrote this story called El Abecedario de Fútbol, the alphabet of football or soccer. And you can see they used clip art, and it was a wonderful, wonderful piece. If you look, just go ahead to the next 2 slides very slowly so we can see the examples. So here is A, the letter A in football. The letter A represents athlete. Go ahead. In the alphabet of football, the letter B represents ball, balón. And notice what the boys did. They included, and this was after a lot of our discussion, we didn't want this to be a baby book, but at the same time, they needed to do some research. And so in soccer, there's a different size of ball used for girls soccer and for boys soccer, and they put that information in here. So that was really interesting for a lot of people who were less familiar. And right now, of course, we have the World Cup, so it's very exciting. Okay, go ahead, change. Over at Waipahu High School in the English classes where the kids are trying to learn English, they're also divided into academies. This young lady was in the health academy. So she did her book and used Canva to actually produce it. She did the book of body parts, A through Z. Go ahead and turn to the next one. So here's an example, and using Canva is fantastic. If you've got, I think everybody's got subscriptions to that. But you see it's in English on top and in her home language on the bottom. So this was a really good way for us to include. Go ahead, a couple more. This is for the Culinary Academy. The boys did these, and they really grew their English language. Now, these took a while because they had to really learn the terminology. They had to work on putting in all of the incorrect information, but also doing it structurally correctly. And then down below, you can see it says Ilocano, where the student put it in their home language. Go ahead to the next one.
5-minute warning, Elizabeth.
Yeah, we're almost done. And I mentioned earlier about the pañuelo. So this is something that if in your language class, there is something that you can connect to the Aina, there's something that you can connect to here. To me, this is like, such a gift because it's a reason to know Spanish. And there is a history in Hawaii that has to do with Spanish language. I got this one from, excuse me, Teacher Created Materials. And it's actually a book that has a lot of little algebra stuff in it. It's around a 5th grade level reading in English, but I thought this would be a great one for the kids to translate. So if you've got students in higher grade levels, oh yeah, some of you have said that. You had free access to Canva last year. That is fantastic. So use it, do it. Okay, one more. I put this in here. This is a book. I did not write it, but I love it and have loved it for many years. It's called Family Pictures, Cuadros de Familia. And as you can see from the picture on the cover, Carmen Lomas Garza, every page in the book tells about a different, family culture experience. Now, this is not culture that's dancing and music. This is what you do for different holidays and different experiences. So this one, you might know, is making tamales. So the whole family is together making the tamales. And so each page has a paragraph in English and a paragraph in Spanish that tells about this. So this is a really good one to acquire for your classes, actually. Go ahead, Kevin, one more. Here are 2 more pages out of the book. The one on the left, I don't know if anybody knows what that is? I'm kind of throwing it out there. Like, does anybody know what that is? Okay, I'm looking at chat to see. Okay, so, excuse me. Yes, it's a painting. And so we call those cascarones. And these are, what you do is you take the egg and you blow out the egg stuff that's in the center, so that all you have is the shell, but it's still in its shape. And that gets colored, and you stuff it with a whole bunch of confetti, and then you cover it with a little piece of tissue paper, and then you use those to whack people. But that is something that you may or may not have ever experienced, and she includes those kinds of things in the book, which is great. Oh, cascarones. And then she says boda for the other one. And so you can see they're preparing here. I don't know if it's a boda or if it's a quinceañera, but the lady's face, the bride's face looks a little older. So yes, thank you, La Novia. Gracias, Maria. So this is a really good example of how to introduce more about the culture and practice reading and speaking and using Spanish or using the target language. I have many, many books that I can share. I'm happy to come to your school and read and share with your students about writing books. And I don't know, did you put in one more, Kevin? Like an ending slide? Very good.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, thank you so much. At this time, with whatever time we have left, we wanted to open it up for any questions. I know that we had to go a little bit quickly through some things, so if there are things you want clarification on, now is the time. Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself to ask.
Okay, this is not a question, this is a compliment for your presentation. I really feel like sometimes culture is not teaching appropriate because we worry about the language use, and the way you presented today, you make us feel, especially for new teachers, can help them also to not be afraid to use the target language using teaching culture on lower level. So I really appreciate that point. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yeah, you're right. It's hard to figure out and work in balance of giving the input in the language and exposing the students to cultural understandings in the classroom. But I've found that certain strategies help me to achieve that balance, right? The language and the culture. So, yeah.
Mio asked in the chat, which levels did you aim these lessons for?
Yeah, that's what I was just looking at. For the concept books, these are really for the beginners. So your kids in Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 even, but I have a whole list of like the steps that you can take. So if you had students who are in higher levels, level 3, level 4 of language learning, the way that I typically would do this is start with the concept books, then go to compilations. Compilations are bringing together a collection of, for example, I did with the students in California, I did a book of cognates, and the kids put that together. So there's no plot, setting, characters, it's just a compilation, either of words or skills or ideas. And then after that, we took story innovation. And innovation is where you take an existing story and you change the characters, like the 3 pigs, and instead of telling it from their point of view, you tell it from the wolf's point of view. And there's so many wonderful, wonderful folk tales from other cultures. And one of the things, I had a family visiting me for 4th of July from California, and I gave them a lei, and it was the kukui nut, and they go, kukui? Because they are Mexican. And kukui is like a tale of tik tik, or like a tale of a monster that comes after you and so forth. So anyway, the innovation's one type of story. One is also your personal narrative, like we saw with the Lalo book, where he's telling his story. And these are fantastic because some of the things we get from the kids were just like, wow. Let's see, what else did they have in there? Anyway, we have at each of the levels, there are probably 2 types of books that fit with with the learning and world language level.
All right. Mahalo. Mahalo, Elizabeth. Mahalo, Kevin. And mahalo to everyone who came today. And the session is recorded, so we'll be posting it on our YouTube site. And then for next week, which is our last Summer Summit Teacher Tuesday, we're actually going to have discussions in our target language groups about culture and about, sharing our ideas. How do you, how do you integrate culture, and then how do we keep it in the target language? And I think the leveling, the question that you asked about the levels, that's always the trickiest part, right? So we'll discuss that more next week, and then we're going to wrap up our summer summit. So mahalo, Kevin, mahalo, Elizabeth, mahalo, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop recording now. I'll stay on here for a